Live in 10 seconds. Over to you, Paresh, sir.
Thank you very much. Hello, good evening, and welcome to another episode of In Conversation With. In Conversation With is a management series by CASI New York, where we invite senior management professionals from across the world in search of executable advice. So today's session promises to be very interesting. We have Marcus making the presentation to start with, and then we have other speakers. My name is Paresh, and I'm a member of the board of directors at New York at CASI. We are the world's largest platform for sustainability with a presence in 52 countries. We also run a very large volunteering platform with a reach of over 3 million volunteers. Hello and welcome to the show. Thank you all for being with us. Over to you, Marcus. Please let us have your thoughts on sustainability.
All right, many thanks. So today it's my pleasure to talk about hands-on climate risk management. My name is Marcus Wimmer, and let me kickstart the presentation. All right, so well, when I give these type of presentations, I usually like to start with this picture. It's taken from the New York Times, and it gives you another perspective on water and air. So I hope this picture is self-explanatory. So on the left-hand side, you see all water in this green bubble, and in the pink bubble, you see all the air in the atmosphere. And I think it becomes very clear that ESG and climate risk is not just another regulation like we have seen it before. It's a real world topic, it's a real world problem, and we need to find smart solutions. Regarding climate risk, I think it's also important to see the connectivity across silos. So as you see here, there are 3 buckets. The one on the left-hand side shows you what some of the most recent and most important regulatory documents coming from the NGFS, Network for Greening the Financial System, as well as the ECB when you are looking on Europe, or here this one is taken for the US. So it's the Commodities Future Trading Commission document on climate risks. And the second bucket shows you what's currently going on in the climate science and research space. I think everyone agrees that the IPCC AR6 report is basically the gold standard as of now. So it's a document with more than 4,000, close to 4,000 pages, and it shows everything about climate risks, so the development in the past decades as well as an outlook. But it's definitely worth to consider also other research papers when you want to learn more about the interdependencies of the physical climate risks. And here on the right-hand side, you see, I think, another important pillar, energy analytics. So you also need to understand what's currently going on in the energy space regarding the energy supply, regarding the energy demand, regarding the transition from fossil fuels to renewables. So it makes sense, regardless where you work, to not only look into one pillar, but also consider other pillars and try to connect these pillars. Here, this is basically a very easy to understand summary of the IPCC AR6 report. It captures a variety of topics, including CO2 concentration, rainfall, what's currently going on regarding the ice, what about the temperatures on land, what about the global sea level, as well as the ocean temperatures. And without going into the details, I think the trend is very clear here. When you look on the color coding, basically everything is running into the same direction. We see the impact of global warming already. And I think it's important to look into this document when you want to understand the climate science behind also the current regulatory and political discussions. This one, that's a visualization taken from the IPCC AR6 report. And I think it's a very good summary on where we stand regarding the climate. So you need to read it this way. Each and every item here shows you basically one climate zone on the planet. So this is the entire planet divided into, I think, 46 different climate zones. Sometimes it makes sense to aggregate certain countries because they have similar climate characteristics, and the IPCC scientists have done this. And you see in the upper left corner basically what has changed regarding the temperatures and the color coding. I think it's self-explanatory. So everything became warmer since 1950. Here in the second bucket, you see the rainfall development since 1950. And I would say half of the regions are now experiencing more rain due to global warming. And here the last bucket is showing the droughts or heat domes. And as you see, also half of the climate zones are experiencing a significant increase in droughts and heat domes. So the conclusion from the IPCC report is it's getting hotter everywhere, and the different regions are either suffering from heavy rain or from droughts, and occasionally also from both. So this is based on data, based on facts, and I think it's a really good visualization. Next, I want to show you these two visualizations, which are also taken from the climate science report, so the IPCC report. On the left-hand side, you see a chart which shows you the average global surface temperature and the concentration of emissions in the atmosphere. And the IPCC climate scientists, they have tried to also show some scenarios from now to the year 2050. And current increase is already 1.25 degrees. And the IPCC scientists, they expect that the temperature increase will lead to a corridor between plus 1.8 degrees Celsius and plus 2.8 degrees Celsius. So this is the range outlined by the climate scientists. And my background is banking. And in banking, you have the concept of reverse stress testing. And I've applied this idea to the chart here. And because you never know what will happen in the next decade. So the outlook from now to the year 2050, that is a really long outlook. And I think even if we now have this IPCC AR6 report, we cannot be sure that we fully understand the connectivity of the climate, including the climate tipping points. So I think for the discussion, also when there is the COP26 meeting in Glasgow in October and November, the world leaders should also at least think about the scenario where we have higher temperatures than expected. And here, this one, that is another visualization from the IPCC report. And it shows you the development from the year 1750 until now. And I think the color coding is very clear. Only in the last decades, we see the switch from a bluish color coding to more red color coding. And basically we are here now, and it's now up to us. So we are sitting in the driver's seat, and with the decisions we make in the COP26 summit, and also in the parliaments all over the world, and in the economy, and across the banking sector, we have basically an influence on where we will end up in the year 2100. And even if all of us, so sorry to say this, but we won't experience the year 2100, but I think every one of us knows children who will reach this year. And so it's becoming also a personal story when you think about your own families and how old the children will be in the year 2100. And hopefully we will end up here in the lower region where we have a similar climate as of now. It will slowly increase, but we should avoid a scenario where the temperature increase is super significant and leads to all the negative implications. Next, this is, I think, a very useful checklist when you want to talk about climate risks and also the different categories. So it's also derived from the IPCC report. You see two versions just to make sure that everyone can read what is stated. So here you have basically a good summary of the different phenomena we know regarding physical climate risks, and they are broken down into the underlying pieces. And I think this is a very good checklist when you also design localized stress tests, and there are, of course, further information in the document. So please check out the IPCC AR6 report and go to page 24 to see this checklist. And the next one is not from the IPCC report. It's coming from the Chatham House. That is a UK-based think tank. And I think they have done a really good job with showing the connectivity between the transition risks. So on the left-hand side, everything starts with climate impact. So the physical risks, rainfall, droughts, heat waves, and so on. And it goes from left to right, and you see everything what is stated here on the left-hand side will translate in some impact. So first round impact. That could be, just to give you some examples, that could be water scarcity, crop failure, or loss of infrastructure. And of course, then the second order and third order implications kick in. So when there is no water and there is no food available, that will of course lead to social unrest, to health crisis, to food crisis, to GDP loss, just to give some examples. And this will ultimately also translate into migration. I think we all know examples where this has happened in the past. That can also lead to failed states or military conflicts and populism across regions. So this is, I think, a really good toolbox when you just want to start with brainstorming how this can affect the economies. And please don't stop thinking here. So this is just the starting point. There are plenty of other factors which can also be added, but of course, that is here a snapshot from the Chatham House, and I think it's a good starting point for every discussion. Next one. So as I said, my background is in banking. We as a banking community also need to think about how we can integrate the new risks. So climate risk separated into transition risks and into the physical risks, into the basically the risk governance, which you see here on the right-hand side. And the best way, I think, is the economic transmission channel view. So you can split it into the micro view and look what is currently going on in the business world as well as in the households. And of course, there's also the macro view. And this visualization is derived from the Network for Greening the Financial System. In case you get started with climate risk and environmental risk assessments, I strongly recommend to check their platform. So I think it's ngfs.com or .org, but you will find it on Google, and they have a really good collection of interesting reports which help to understand how this works. Next one, that is basically a summary, some hands-on recommendations, what you can do in your organization to drive this topic. So I think we need more climate risk leadership. And basically in each and every organization, we have, of course, a strategy, or we should have a strategy in place, I have to say. We have reporting. In the banking world, we have ICAP and ILAB. These are regulatory concepts for banks. There should be a risk inventory. We have, of course, a committee landscape. We use different models to make forecasts. We have a data infrastructure, including the underlying IT systems. In banks, there's also this concept of stress testing, and we need to have limits for our most important metrics and KPIs. And of course, there's also governance setup, which you show with the different functions and teams. And ideally, all the organizations also offer training sessions and have a certain risk culture. And the easiest thing what you can do when you want to get started with climate risk and want to implement it into your organization is when you have certain documents in place, just start by adding one new chapter with the header climate risk, and then start filling it with live and creating links to other existing documents. Put it on the agenda of the most important meetings. Make it not a one-off, make it a reoccurring event, and also adjust your model space, your model landscape, because when you talk about climate risk and when you want to integrate it into your existing data management framework, you of course need to add additional data attributes. And I think this is important to keep in mind. You need also additional budget for enhancing your IT infrastructure. So please don't forget requesting the budget. And of course, you should also start off designing climate risk scenarios which consider all the local characteristics, including when you work in operations, including the supply chains, or including the vulnerabilities of the different regions in which you operate. So I think the IPCC report and other sources like NASA in the US or NOAA, the weather organization, they provide plenty of data which can be used also to monitor the current climate, the current weather conditions, and use the insights which are already available and try to connect it as good as possible. And I think it's also important to keep in mind that in the near future, we will see a war for talent regarding climate scientists. So currently, the big insurance companies, they have already hired the experts, the weather experts, and they have the insights. And I assume, that's my personal view, that also banks and regulators will start building up internal teams because they want to have the internal expertise. And after having said this, of course, you need to train your people, and you need to enhance your risk culture internally. Last slide here regarding the content part. So this is basically a global risk radar as of September 2021. You see here climate risk, that is my topic for today, but there are of course other really important risk events. So I've created two buckets. The first one is has the name high impact risk events, and the second one is B, black and green swan risk events. And I think everything what is stated here under A, the leadership team and the senior management, they are familiar with the terms. So everyone, I think, has heard about the competition between China and the US. So that shouldn't be something new. There's always the risk of a new financial crisis, can be triggered by cryptocurrencies, can be triggered by inflation or any other bubble. There's, of course, the risk of cyber attacks, and that could lead to a multi-day blackout in a large city. We have seen with the Brexit vote that there's also this risk of a European fragmentation. And please don't forget the demographic changes, which will happen in all countries, all regions, and we should also consider the demographic development. And regarding the second bucket, that is also for brainstorming. So black and green swan risk events, solar flares. So I read about this last year. It's one of the risks which is completely underestimated because we are not familiar with this type of science, and but it's a severe risk which could lead to a collapse of the GPS and satellite networks, which would then, of course, have a severe impact on the global economy. There's always this risk of a major terror attack, something like 9/11. Hopefully we won't see it, but of course the risks remain. Everyone is talking about the corona pandemic, but you never know when the next pandemic kicks in. There's always the risk of an ecosystem collapse. Let's think of the ocean and fishing. In case we continue with fishing at this pace and scale, there is a risk that the ocean ecosystem collapses. As we see now, of course, please don't forget there are volcanic eruptions, which can happen in many regions. I think I've pointed this out on one of the previous slides, the risk of failed states. Just think of what's currently going on in Afghanistan, or what could be possible with regards to North Korea. You never know.
Paresh sir, you're on mute.
Yeah, so am I audible?
Yeah, now you're audible.
Oh, so sorry. Yeah, so I just shifted my internet connections from one to another. So you see, I have been a banker all my life, so I'm a core finance guy. In fact, before becoming an entrepreneur and starting CASI, I was a managing director of a Swiss bank, and before that, I was a director in an Indian bank. So this topic is of very high interest. But as a banker, when you are presenting, you made a list of risks. What are the risks and what should be done to mitigate those risks, which ended with training. So how about a list of product? Why don't we start with the product and say, okay, the product teams should inculcate a particular risk within the product note. And so a very rough example is stop giving car loans or make car loans costlier. Take a 1% subsidy on giving car loans and use that 1% for climate risk. How about that? How about when will banks actually put the climate risk in a product note and not in the risk note? See, everything ends with the risk, but by the time the damage has been done, yeah. So there is a product, we make money, and then we analyze the risk. We already make money before that, yeah, and then we analyze the risk, so we mitigate it with as little money as possible, and we bring in a consultant to make things look very nice. But when do you think banks will really work on the product and say, okay, car loans are damaging, let's make them costlier. Agri loans are good for the economy, let's make them cheaper. Let's take 1% from here and give 1% here. Do you think that will happen?
Yeah, of course. Many thanks for the question. It's a really good one. So I think you have also followed the news, what China has announced today. So they don't want to fund coal power plants outside of China. And this is basically a really big example what is currently going on in the world. And this climate risk discussion is already shaping the regulation, which is, I think, really good. And so I'm based in Germany, in Europe, in the heart of Europe. And here we are also talking about the EU taxonomy, and there the regulator is planning to implement a green asset ratio. So that means that banks really need to be really careful regarding their client interaction and the products they are offering, because they need to fulfill the requirements which come with the green asset ratio in the future. So the regulators, of course, are designing a new regulatory environment, and banks, of course, need to interact with the clients, and clients are also improving the pace. When you think of Mercedes, the famous German car maker, and their aspiration regarding electric vehicles. So there's a lot of development across all sectors. We see it in politics, we see it in banking, we see it across the industries. And yeah, as banks, we need to understand, or all organizations who are involved in this discussion need to understand the dynamics and the mechanics of climate change or climate crisis and the climate risk management. So therefore, it's important to not look only into the physical risks and the extreme weather events, which you see all over in the media, but also to understand the transition channels and to understand the connectivity.
Correct, correct. Thank you. Thank you for that, Marcus. Kishan sir, are you there? I have a question for you.
Yes, I'm here. Sorry.
Very, very nice of you. Thank you for being a good sport, sir. You are working for the government. You probably have a better, deeper understanding of the Kyoto Protocol and what the things are happening in the government, the UN rules and all. So, what according to you will happen in the next few years? Are the capitalists going to listen while creating products, or is it going to be a one-side affair with a lot of noise and no real results?
Well, thank you very much, and thank you, Parish, for the invitation. And I want to congratulate Marcus on an excellent presentation. I think you covered the whole gamut of risks from biophysical to financial. So very good presentation. And I agree with you, Parish, regarding the noises that we've been hearing. We've heard a lot of this before. We've seen, for example, a lot of virtue signaling by companies, where you get glossy intentions and nice presentations and documents, and behind the scenes they do the complete opposite. We've heard about greenwashing. We've seen it happening. But I think now we are at a point, and I think a large amount of that has been due to the international policy framework evolving in the last 5 or 6 years, certainly since the Paris Agreement, and more recently with the IPCC report coming out in August. And what the IPCC report is saying is that business as usual, it underscores that business as usual is risky business. We are already under a business as usual scenario, even with the pledges under the Paris Agreement, to already achieve that 1.5 targeted for 2100 in 2030, with 3 or 4 degrees in 2100, which would make life very difficult, if not impossible, in some island states and other developing countries, and also developed countries. So I think from the capitalist perspective, to come back to your question, I think now that with the enhanced requirements for ESG reporting in particular, and the investment portfolios now being green, particularly in multilateral banks, for example, largely arising out of, and forgive me for being a little bit pedantic, Article 2.1c in particular of the Paris Agreement. And I know this sort of in the back of my hand because I co-chaired the negotiations under the Paris Agreement in 2013, 2014, when these issues came up. And so now financial flows have to be aligned with low carbon development. It has to be aligned with building climate resiliency. So whether those flows are loans, whether they are grants, whether they're concessional loans, they have to be aligned with some of these. And we have seen that that alignment in the greening of the portfolios of certainly the multilateral banks, the World Bank, for example, European Development Bank, for example. So I think we've gone past a lot of that baseline noise, that greenwashing, that virtue signaling, to now seeing a lot of changes actually happening. And a lot of that change is also being driven from the top in terms of policy directives. So we know, for example, the European Green Deal and the carbon border adjustment measures that are coming will now force companies to restructure their own operations and to reduce their embedded carbon in their products. So I think that this is only the start. We've seen the Democrats in the US also signaling that they are on the way to instituting similar measures. For us in Trinidad and Tobago, we are the 4th largest supplier of fertilizers to the European Union. So we have a stake in that as well. So I think what we are seeing is the beginning of a trend where investments now are going beyond the greenwashing, beyond the virtue signaling, to actual on the ground, actual greening and carbon reduction in line with the 1.5 trajectory of the Paris Agreement. Because now it actually will mean consequences for not complying with these new policy directives that are coming out from the top-down level. Certainly, the European Green Deal is one example. We will see that being followed by the US shortly, certainly. So I think that will not only be restricted to these countries. I think there's an article this morning, if I looked at the news just before, that China has also indicated that it will not fund any coal projects beyond its borders. Of course, what they do within their domestic situation needs to also be addressed. But that ambition building and that impetus coming into the next few weeks to culminate in the Glasgow conference, I think we can see some more strong political signals that will in fact impact on business and how business does it, and how the capitalists, as you put it, Parish, will now have to rethink and reconfigure their businesses, their business approach, their business paradigm to fit this new trajectory going forward. Because as Marcus showed, and I took notes. I was taking copious notes, and I looked at his last slide. I think it was maybe the second to last slide with the two buckets A and B. And if you examine each of them at a more granular level, you will find a climate risk signal. Whether it comes from security issues, as you have pointed out in earlier slides, whether it comes from economic collapse arising from civil unrest, for example, whether it comes from ecosystem collapse, the tipping points that you pointed out, for example, the Gulf Stream collapsing that tempers the winters in Europe. And we are also seeing now, I looked at the news again this morning, where you see the rising prices of natural gas now, which normally would signal good news for the energy sector, is now having an impact on European food security. And I think one of the companies are now looking for a bailout because they have to now cut their production by 40% in order to remain profitable and in business. So all of these things are happening at a time when the realities of the world, and they're all underlined by climate risks, need to now be properly addressed. And I think that will also provide an impetus for looking at alternative fuels, for example, solar or renewable energy. If we had that in place, the gas prices wouldn't matter. If we had green hydrogen coming from, electrolysis of water, for example, powered by renewable energy, we will not be having this crisis because they use natural gas as a source of hydrogen for their ammonia and fertilizers and so on. So I think what all of these world events are now actually showing in a more defined way what the underlying climate risks can spell for business, for world trade going forward, as we now try to rein in the temperature increases to the 1.5 that we want to see as the objective of the Paris Agreement. I've gone on long enough. Sorry about that.
Thank you very much, Kishan sir. Those are very well let out thoughts. So thank you very much for your thoughts. And I agree, business as usual will not work anymore unless we fall in line with all the climate action and the sustainability action. Yeah. So at CASI we are setting up a high-level committee for carbon for the ESG exchange, the proposed ESG exchange. And so we are working day and night on that. And my team says that the rate of carbon offset would go up. So the rate of carbon credits would go up. And that is why we are, kind of in a hurry to do something big in India and work on carbon credits for agri-based carbon credits, for plantation-based carbon credits. But thank you very much for your thoughts, sir. Those are completely in line with what is happening, and it's a learning for us. Thank you very much, Marcus, for your presentation. As I said, you make an amazing presentation. We would love to have you again on the show. As a supporter to CASI. You have some amazing presentations and slides. So shall we go on to the next speaker for the day, Dr. Mitesh?
Pareshji, we have lost Evelyn. I think her connection is down. I just received a ping from her. She's trying to reconnect, but she's not able to. She's probably out on the field.
No, we can end the session in a couple of minutes. Let's end today's session here and call her for the next session some other time. Patrick, if you have a question, or Gayatri, if you have a question for Marcus, please.
Was there someone else? Or
No, Patrick, all yours. Let me introduce Patrick. He's a very good friend, a strong supporter of CASI. He's a risk professional based in China, and he's a European based in China. So he's a risk professional, European based in China. So he has a very unique set of skill sets, right? So that makes him a very interesting person, and he's a very good friend. Patrick, please.
Not always very popular with the speakers, I think. I mean, when I look at this, if I just go at one thing, hire climate scientists, for me that doesn't make sense from a risk point of view. I mean, if we think that climate is going up or the temperature is going up, then what is needed is people who can actually evaluate, for example, the solutions. Greenwashing was mentioned. I think you need people who have the capability to assess, is this company actually doing something or is it not doing something? And I think the way, I'm not someone who is involved in calculations, but if you look at the calculations, you know it's going to be very easy you can look at now the big accountant companies, they're going to go in and figure out how to get around the calculations. And that's going to be the big business. It's just like tax avoidance, right? You make a lot of money by not paying taxes. So the same way companies will be able to get around the emission game by doing the calculations in clever ways. And that's where the risk is. And even the solutions, even if you look at electric cars were mentioned, you look at wind, solar, I think there's a lot of risk associated with the solutions. So we're spending all this money blindly, I feel, on solutions because we are so afraid of what's going to happen. And there's no risk assessment on the solutions at all, I feel. If you come with a wind project or a solar project, everyone's just saying, oh, this is perfect. You see the thing of 100% green energy again and again, and it's not 100% green. It's not even close. So always with my questions, is it a question or a statement? But basically, it's a challenge to say, are those risks that I'm talking about acknowledged and are they being managed?
Yeah, many thanks for your comments. So I think that's a very interesting point regarding energy transition. And when you read announcements or see it in the news that there is a new wind park here and a new solar farm there, I think a critical point is to always do the calculation, even if it's a back on the envelope calculation. You get a certain number, megawatt or gigawatt, when you see a new wind park or solar park. And in 2020, the global energy demand was about, I think, 5,000 gigawatt. Just to give you one perspective, the famous dam in China, the big one, it produces around about 20 gigawatt. So you need 250 of these dams to provide sufficient energy based on the 2020 figures for the entire world. And currently we see, of course, the electrification of things. Everyone is talking about electric cars on the road. In Germany, we will switch off the nuclear power plants next year. So it's important to keep the energy aspect and the energy industry in scope when you make your risk assessments, because seeing only shiny presentations with wind parks and solar farms and a number, hey, we have increased our facilities by 200% or so. That is, of course, important, and it's going into the right direction. But you need to make your own calculation to see how significant this new investment is on a global scale. And I think here it makes sense to always do your own calculations. And to your first question, or to your first comment regarding hiring climate scientists, yes or no, I think we in the banks, we have all the experience regarding credits, credit processes, credit approvals. We have the experience regarding treasury and market risk management, as well as operational risk. We are currently building up our capacity regarding cyber, but I would say only a fraction of the employees of large organizations are able to really understand the IPCC report, and not the executive summary, but also the content parts, and also analyzing satellite pictures and stuff like this. So I would assume that this can give banks and all big corporations and organizations a competitive advantage in the future if there is at least a small team able to understand this, and not only the climate science, but also the energy analytics. And that would be my recommendation.
Well, I think just to follow up on that, I think, I mean, there's two channels to this, right? So one is a competitive advantage. So if you say, is there a competitive advantage in doing this and having the calculation and understanding the report so that you can then respond to any criticism, I definitely agree. But if you are saying it as a hippie who is out and hugging his tree and hoping to save his tree, I don't think it has any value.
Sure.
So this is the two roads, and it comes back to what Paresh mentioned, is what is actually helping the corporation and what is actually helping the climate change. Because the climate change risk is basically, okay, more pollution. And I don't like CO2 focus. I like all pollution going into a limited atmosphere, a limited ocean, a limited river. It doesn't require a lot of brain power to figure out at some stage it's going to go bad wrong. So basically it's limiting that pollution. So what you need is to have someone who understands how much pollution is going in. And if you have some clean projects that are doing a good job, but at the same time, developing countries and all the companies that are getting pushed out by the good companies, they do more bad, the overall picture is actually worse. And I think that's something, the whole risk is actually there, and it's not that IPCC report is not talking about the right thing, in my opinion.
It's definitely an interesting topic, and I think we will also see on the COP26 summit a lot of changes and further action points for the world leaders and the industries, and it will be interesting, definitely. I have to leave this meeting, so I want to say thank you to all of you for having me here on air. It was a pleasure, and I'm looking forward to catching up in the future.
Thank you very much, Marcus, for being here. So let's close the session for the day. Thank you very much. It was an interesting session. Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Kishan sir. Thank you, Gayatri. Yeah, thank you all very much for making this session interesting. Thank you very much. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.